Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So today, we are going to break down the core arguments from a talk by Dave Weiss on the Flat Earth model, and we're going to do it by looking at the key visuals and demonstrations that he actually uses to make his case.
So, here's the plan. We're going to explore this model by looking at his explanation for how the sun and moon work, then his big challenge to a fundamental force of physics, then we'll break down how he explains an everyday observation, the sunset, and finally, we'll get into the reasoning he provides for this entire worldview.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First up, we're looking at how this model explains what we all see up in the sky. And according to the speaker, common events like eclipses, well, they work very, very differently than what we've been taught.
So, the speaker kicks things off with a pretty simple observation about shadows. He argues that in the standard model, a giant spherical Earth should cast a shadow with a straight edge onto the moon. But what do we actually see during a lunar eclipse? It's a curved shadow. He says, hey, that's exactly what you'd expect to see if a shadow were being cast onto a flat surface. Now, to explain this a bit more, he proposes this really interesting experiment. Imagine the sun we see isn't the real sun, but it's more like a projection on a screen. He shows that if you put a light source behind, say, a paper towel, and then you block that light with a bottle cap from behind, what do you see from the front? You only see the light disappear. You never actually see the object that's causing the eclipse, which, he argues, is exactly what happens in the sky. All right, next up, the speaker points to a kind of curious geographic pattern with solar eclipses. He claims that the longest ones, they pretty much all happen north of the equator. So, how does his model explain that? Well, he suggests the sun actually travels in a smaller, slower circle over the northern regions and a much bigger, faster circle over the south. If that were true, it would naturally make eclipses shorter in the south.
Okay, let's switch gears and move on to the next section. This is where it gets really interesting, because we're going to focus on the speaker's pretty bold challenge to the concept of gravity itself.
So, a really central argument against gravity starts with a simple question about the very air we breathe. The speaker's claim is that gas pressure, just by its nature, absolutely has to have a container. The idea of our atmosphere just sitting there, right next to the total vacuum of space, with no physical wall or barrier, he presents that as a scientific impossibility. It's like trying to keep a tire inflated without the tire.
And to back this up, he points to what happens inside vacuum chambers. He shows these examples where balloons with just a tiny bit of air in them blow up to a massive size. And even heavy gases like nitrogen will rush upward to fill a vacuum, which seems to defy gravity. The takeaway for him is that gas will always expand to fill an empty space, which, he argues, makes our open system atmosphere just impossible.
So if it's not gravity pulling things down, then what is it? Well, the speaker proposes an alternative, a natural downward flow of energy. He uses an analogy here, the Franklin Bell experiment, where a little piece of metal just bounces back and forth between a wire connected to the ground and another wire high up on a drone. He says this shows an electrical potential, a natural downward direction for energy to flow.
This brings us to something we've all seen a million times, the sunset. But in this model, it has nothing to do with the Earth turning. It's all about the mechanics of light and perspective.
And really, this quote says it all. The argument is that a sunset is basically just an optical illusion. The sun isn't physically dropping below some curve. It's simply moving horizontally away from you until it just vanishes from your point of view.
And get this, he says you can see this for yourself. He demonstrates it with a super simple setup. He just makes a cloud deck with some pillows on the floor, holds a light above it, and then walks the light away. And from a low vantage point, what you see is the light appearing to sink down and set perfectly behind the pillows in the distance.
Okay, but wait a minute. If the sun is just moving away, why doesn't it shrink down to a little dot before it disappears? Well, the speaker attributes this to an optical effect he calls angular perspective compression. It's basically this idea that objects moving away from us way up high in the sky don't seem to shrink in the same way that a car driving down the road does. He says this effect, plus some atmospheric magnification, is what keeps the sun looking big even as it gets further away. And to really drive this point home, he shows some drone footage. You see the sun setting, right? But as the drone flies higher and higher, you can see the sun isn't actually behind the land at all. It's disappearing behind what the speaker calls an atmospheric deck of opacity, basically a layer in the atmosphere that becomes so thick in the distance that you can't see through it, creating its own horizon way above the actual ground.
All right, let's get to our final section and the big question here. Why? According to the speaker, why would a deception of this scale even exist in the first place? Well, the motivation he presents isn't about science or money. It's psychological. It's spiritual. The speaker argues that the globe model is designed to be a mental prison, to limit our sense of potential and convince us that we live on this insignificant little speck in a giant, meaningless void. He suggests it's all designed to hide the existence of more land and maybe even a greater purpose.
And so that's our look at the core arguments presented in this talk. It really leaves you with this one big question to chew on. What does it really mean for our understanding of reality when the same things we see every single day, like a simple sunset or an eclipse, can be used as evidence for entirely different, totally conflicting worldviews?